Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Game Plan. This is a Super Bowl edition, San Francisco 49ers versus the Kansas City Chiefs in a game that I think matches up the two best teams in the NFL right now, with all respect to Baltimore and what they did during the regular season. And yes, Baltimore did end the regular season as my number one team in my power rankings, but the Super Bowl meter, once we got into the playoffs, I always felt that Kansas City, the way they were playing and the style of football they play, and the San Francisco 49ers, they were always my two favorite teams to make the Super Bowl, and here we are. So very good. As I always do on this video series, we look at the key injuries, we look at the key stats, the key analytics. We look at path to victory for the San Francisco 49ers, the path to victory for the Kansas City Chiefs, and of course we look and finish this episode out with some daily fantasy, if you're going to play daily fantasy this weekend, daily fantasy projections. Now, I do want to remind everybody I'm not a fan of either of these teams. I don't like or dislike anybody. I literally just, I love the NFL, and I love kind of putting and handicapping these matchups. So I'm more of a better, a betting enthusiast, and I put these videos together as an unbiased way to really kind of match everybody up. So you're going to hear some compliments about your team. You're probably going to hear some not so nice things about your team from time to time. Don't take it personally. This is just how I see it if I'm making investment in this game. So let's start, as I always do, with the key injuries. Now, if you see this, bye weeks always help, right? They've had the bye week. Tevin Coleman, who had that shoulder injury against the Green Bay Packers. You get Tart at strong safety for San Francisco, both questionable. I think Tart will go. Coleman, I haven't seen the latest on him yet. Believe me, if he can go, he will go. If not, though, I don't think it's the end of the world because, of course, they have Matt Breida as well. Defensive tackle, Chris Jones, that's a big one for the Kansas City Chiefs, but I think he will play. If we move it forward to the positional groupings, now, what I like to do is I like to match up pass defense versus pass offense, run offense versus run defense, and so on and so forth. And what I did is, because the rankings have been changing throughout the playoffs, what I did is I went back to the end of Week 16. Because at the end of Week 16, you don't get any oddities in Week 17, although with the San Francisco 49ers and Kansas City Chiefs, they both had to play hard in Week 17, but still some teams start doing goofy things in Week 17. I didn't want that thrown into the data. So these numbers aren't as of today, but I think they're more important to look at them as they were within the regular season. And what we see is the San Francisco 49ers as of Week 16 were ranked 14th in the passing game versus the 14th ranked passing defense for the Kansas City Chiefs. Meanwhile, the pass defense for the San Francisco 49ers is first versus the 4th ranked passing offense for the Kansas City Chiefs. Keep in mind a couple of things. One, San Francisco, I think their pass rank could certainly be higher, but they were so run-heavy earlier in the year. There was actually, I think, one of these videos where San Francisco's pass offense was ranked at like 27, and they're in terms of yardage accumulation or yardage per game. Now, did that mean, as I said back then, that San Francisco can't throw the ball, or do I think that San Francisco is an average passing attack? No, I don't think so. I just think that San Francisco likes to run the ball a little bit more, which hurts the overlying passing numbers. Now, Kansas City, on the other hand, are they the fourth best ranked the fourth best passing offense in the league? No. I believe they are definitely the best passing offense in the league. Don't forget Patrick Mahomes missed a few games. That's going to affect the ranking. This passing offense and this passing defense certainly the best in the league. The passing offense versus an improving Kansas City Chiefs passing defense. I think basically both teams are better than their ranking as shown here. So if I'm going to give one advantage or the other, I'm actually not going to give either team an advantage. It's a coin flip. I think they're both very evenly matched. Although I will say that the passing attack and the personnel is going to challenge San Francisco's defensive backfield more than they've been challenged throughout this whole season. If we look at now the run offense, San Francisco's second versus the 26th ranked Kansas City Chiefs running defense. Again, Kansas City's defense is improving, but San Francisco, that you have to give the nod there in the running game to San Francisco, especially when you talk about the Kansas City Chiefs. That's probably been the big weakness for the Kansas City Chiefs this season, is getting that run game going. Damian Williams, mind you, has been banged up for most of the year, even back to training camp. He looks healthy now, so that helps. But if you're going to compare these two teams, I would take San Francisco's running attack more than I would take the Kansas City Chiefs running attack. Kansas City, though, I do like their chances to move the ball against this San Francisco 49ers team. Now, let's look at the key analytics. If you're not familiar, there's a lot of stuff. Certainly, the ability to move the ball is a big thing. But NFL bettors, handicappers, gamblers, they like to look at key metrics. They include yards per play, situational football, third down percentage, fourth down percentage, red zone touchdown percentage, and then I look at the turnovers and penalty yardage. So let's just kind of go down and compare and contrast, right? The San Francisco 49ers offense averages 6 yards per play versus 5.4 yards per play for the Kansas City Chiefs. Defense, meanwhile, the Kansas City Chiefs average 6.3 yards per play versus 4.7 yards per play for the San Francisco 49ers. If you look at the net yardage accumulation, it does lean slightly, very slightly towards the San Francisco 49ers. I don't think it's so heavy that that you need to be concerned if you're a Chiefs fan, but it is worth noting. Third down conversions. San Francisco's offense stays on the field 44% of the time versus 47% of the time for the Kansas City Chiefs. Meanwhile, the defense, this is closer than I thought it would be. I would have thought third down defensive conversions for the 49ers would have been lower than 30%. I would have thought that Kansas City Chiefs would be higher than 36%. So again, if you average these out, there's very little difference between the two teams. Fourth down conversion percentage, San Francisco, certainly their defense, although surprising at 53.9%, you want that percentage to be lower on the defensive side of the ball. I apologize. No, San Francisco's defense, they give up 32.4%. That's what I was expecting. My apologies there, everybody. Kansas City, meanwhile, they convert 63% of the time. San Francisco's offense, 53% of the time, but Kansas City's defense gives up more conversions. So again, comparing and contrasting fourth down situationally, it's probably an even match. Maybe Kansas City's offense converts a little bit more, but San Francisco's defense, gives up the conversions a little less, so it evens out. You look at red zone touchdown percentage. 54% of the time, San Francisco makes the red zone, they score a touchdown. 59% of the time, Kansas City makes the red zone, they score a touchdown. Defensive lead. Now, San Francisco gives up touchdowns 61% of the time once they get into the red zone. Interesting. You would think that would be a little less, but given how dominant San Francisco's their defense has been throughout the year and forcing punts and everything, you would have thought, looking at this in terms of scoring defense, because San Francisco is very good in scoring defense, you would have thought it would be a lower percentage. This is going to be an interesting part of the game. That's a very, very telling and interesting metric. Meanwhile, Kansas City's red zone touchdown percentage is at 51. If you were to take an average of these, you think that over half the time, basically, these two teams make the red zone, they're going to be able to punch it in the end zone. So going to be very interesting. Kicker, I know it's not listed here. I give the kicker, although Harrison Butker has a big leg, I give the ability to hit the field goal under pressure. I give the advantage there to San Francisco. That's a big chunk of this game, especially because I think it's going to be so close. Missed field goals could literally cost a team a game. A missed first field goal in the first half could cost a team a game. Every field goal matters in this game. That's not hyperbole. Literally, I think this could cost a team a game at any point in this matchup here. Turnover margin both at plus 0.4 turnovers per game. Turnover margin obviously is going to be very important, but I don't think it's going to be the key factor in this game. And then penalty yardage, it leans a little bit towards San Francisco, but not heavily so. Now, before I get into the game plan, if I'm looking at this as a bettor, I like the field goal kicker, which again, in a matchup that I think is this close when you're splitting hairs, that means a lot to me. I like Robbie Gould more than I like Butker in pressure situations, so that leans me a little bit towards San Francisco. I love the defensive line, but Patrick Mahomes has the ability, like a Russell Wilson, but maybe even a little bit better passing while he's kind of escaping the pocket. I like the personnel for the Kansas City Chiefs. Man, there's a lot. This is going to be such a good matchup. But here's kind of how I see the game going. And before I get into the game plan, let me just say that I watched the preseason game that they played at the beginning of the year, preseason week 3, with both teams, having their key starters in, both teams, having game plan. Watched the first quarter of that game before Kansas City pulled their starters. It was 10-7 Kansas City. I watched the 2018 game last year when Garoppolo was in the lineup before his injury there, and Kansas City scored, I think, like 35 points in the first half, won the game 38-27 or something like that. Basically, San Francisco came out on fire in the second half, but they had just dug too much of a hole. I think that both of these teams, in watching these two teams play, Shanahan was scheming guys open down the field. Kansas City, as good as and as strong as the San Francisco passing and rushing, pass rush is, Kansas City, I think, is going to find some openings. I think both teams will be able to move the ball. I don't think either team is going to have much more than a 10-point lead throughout this game, although I would say this. If Kansas City goes up big, I think it's going to be harder for San Francisco to catch up. And I think that's pretty obvious. If San Francisco goes big, we saw what happened when Kansas City was down 24-0 against Houston. They have the confidence to make things happen later in the game, even against a tough San Francisco defense. Now, San Francisco is considerably better. I do believe if San Francisco goes up by 24 points, even as strong as Kansas City is, they're not going to be able to close that gap. San Francisco is just too talented. But basically, if San Francisco goes up 2 touchdowns early in the game, I'm not going to be concerned. I don't think Kansas City, the Chiefs players or fans will be concerned either. Let's go into the game plan here, okay? And again, we're splitting hairs. It's really that nothing would surprise me in this game other than both teams being in the teens or lower in terms of score. I think both teams will be in the 20s. Wouldn't shock me. Both teams are in the 30s. I think it's a field goal game either way. If I had to guess now, I would say last possession wins, and it's going to be like a 27-24, 26-24. My analytics are all telling me it's going to be a 1-point game. Kansas City comes in here as 1.5-point favorites. It really is a coin flip. Like I said, those field goals are going to be important. If one of these kickers isn't dialed in, that's going to be a bad day for the other guys. But let's go. So San Francisco, keys to victory here. First of all, contain Patrick Mahomes to the pocket. The one thing I saw continuously, and yeah, I know that's obvious, but I watched, like I said, the 2 games, the preseason game and then last year's matchup when both teams are at full strength. San Francisco was able to get pressure. Now, Nick Bosa didn't play in either the preseason game or obviously the game last year because he was still at Ohio State last year. But I think San Francisco, yes, they will be able to get push with the front 4. But like Russell Wilson, I think, and maybe like Lamar Jackson earlier this year, I think Patrick Mahomes will have the ability to escape the pocket. So they need to basically contain him in there. They don't let him slide in past there. Don't let him get out on the bootleg. Deep ins and crosses will work to Deebo and Emmanuel Sanders. Okay, Deebo Samuel, Emmanuel Sanders. Kyle Shanahan in that preseason game, there were receivers streaking open downfield, and this was before Samuel was even on the first team, and of course Emmanuel Sanders being on the team. Garoppolo in that preseason game was rusty. He's not missing the throws now that he was missing in that preseason game. It's going to be a lot more competitive in the first half. Shanahan will have a game plan that works. There will be openings. In addition to running, right, and San Francisco will run the ball, the passing attack, and I'm talking 20-yard ins, deep crosses, those things are going to be open. They will be there, and I think all day for Kansas City, for San Francisco. Bosa, to me, and I've seen some plays, and I think he's obviously, I really truly believe he's a future Hall of Famer. He's just a physical freak. If he can stay healthy, I think he's going to be like, this decade's J.J. Watt when J.J. Watt was still kind of young and healthy. His ability to sneak out and sniff out, I should say, screen passes is very, very rare. Kansas City, one thing I noticed in watching these games, Kansas City likes to, attack with Damian Williams or, back last season, Kareem Hunt. They like to attack kind of out of the backfield, swing passes and everything. And Andy Reid likes to throw screen passes. Nick Bosa and his ability to defend the screen pass is going to be an interesting kind of storyline in this game. If he can do this successfully, and I think he will, it's going to really complicate, I think, the Kansas City Chiefs scheme. The Chiefs, they do give up yardage on the ground, so I think between the 20s, San Francisco is going to be very, very successful. I think Mostert and Breida are both going to have nice days yardage-wise, but they give up surprisingly few touchdowns in the red zone. They give up surprisingly few running touchdowns. I think then that means that Garoppolo is actually, if you're playing like daily fantasy and everything, I think he's more likely to throw touchdowns than San Francisco is likely to pound the ball into the end zone. Garoppolo throwing to Deebo Samuel, certainly Kittle. Those are going to be interesting pieces. And Kansas City has covered some of the league's best tight ends well. This is an interesting one. So George Kittle, obviously one of the top, if not the top tight end. We might have the top 2 tight ends playing in this game in Kelsey and Kittle. The thing that makes Kittle pretty incredible to me is he's such a good blocker. And I've seen the press out there, about the Kansas City Chiefs. A couple of the players on their defense used to bully him back in Iowa and all that stuff. He's going to come out, and I feel like Kittle is kind of a clutch player. I don't know that Kittle's going to have a crazy yardage day. I don't know that he's going to get triple figures, but I think he's going to be a big factor in that goal line. I think he'll get in the end zone. But the coverage in the tight ends, they've shut down Mark Andrews, the Kansas City Chiefs. They shut down, Darren Waller twice against Oakland. They've played some pretty good tight ends, some very, top-level tight ends. Now, I think Kittle's a little bit better than that. Of course, the defense lines up against Travis Kelce every day, so they know a little something about that. But I think Kittle will be there. Deebo, Samuel, and fades in the red zone, I think, will be big. But San Francisco I think they're going to attack in the red zone through the passing game this game. Not to say that they're not going to take their chances in the running game, but I think they're more likely to be successful in the passing game in the red zone. Now, for the Kansas City Chiefs, they have to find. They have to find space, right? Swing passes, I mentioned before, short passes, short outs against the 49ers. They've had success. And, we know everything about the San Francisco 49ers, how crazy good their pass defense has been. But San Francisco, I was looking back, it's not easy to find and replicate the speed of Kansas City's offense. Now, Tyreek Hill is good as Richard Sherman, and Tyreek Hill is the type of wide receiver that can get past Richard Sherman. You hear like Aaron Rodgers would be like, oh, we're not going to test Richard Sherman too much. And I think Sherman might have even had a pick last game or something like that. But Kansas City's not going to be intimidated by that. They are going to line up, and I know Sherman likes to generally stay on his side of the field. They will line up Tyreek Hill on Richard Sherman and not care. I don't believe, and in terms of that matchup, as good as Sherman is, I do believe that favors Tyreek Hill. I think Tyreek Hill wins every single matchup this week. Now, maybe they try to scheme him out and double cover him and all that stuff, but I don't think there's a guy that can go man on man on Tyreek Hill on this team in San Francisco. So they'll take their shots. Damian Williams, I think he needs to be a big factor in the passing game. I was talking about Nick Bosa and his ability to sniff out screen passes. We'll see that. I would say Andy Reid should probably try to the extent that he can, try to screen away from Nick Bosa. But Damian Williams and those swing passes, he could be a big factor in the receiving game. And if the running back is creating space kind of underneath in that front seven, they're stretching him out laterally, that's going to help the receivers, of course, over the top. It's also going to help, believe me, it'll help neutralize a little bit the rushing attack. Pass coverage with four, sometimes they drop one of their defensive linemen into coverage and try to shadow that running back. That's going to happen this game. We're going to see that look. The more that they can stretch those guys, and especially that defensive line out laterally and vertically, it's going to benefit the Kansas City Chiefs. Mobile quarterbacks, I mentioned before, they've had more success against the 49ers this season than immobile ones, specifically Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Russell Wilson. They've had some success against San Francisco. I think Mahomes' athleticism, I think if I'm Kansas City, I would utilize it. And I would utilize it on bootleg plays away from Nick Bosa. I just don't think you can fool Nick Bosa. Even if you do, he's got the speed and really the intensity to kind of chase these guys down. Brad in the Get Paid podcast says, I think Kansas City will, and Andy Reid specifically, will be able to use San Francisco's defensive line speed against them. And I do think that is feasible. Again, I mentioned before that after watching some kind of recent schematics in recent history, that is exactly what happened. The San Francisco 49ers get the rush with four, and then Mahomes will either slide in or slide out or anything. If I'm Kansas City, I do take some boom or bust plays, run those bootlegs, again, away from Bosa if you can. And I know San Francisco fans would say, hey, yeah, go ahead, give me the bootlegs because we'll get the sack. And it is possible. But if Mahomes can escape on a bootleg, give a little bit more time for like a guy like Tyreek Hill to run deep, I think that's going to be there. I think you got to take your shots. Of course, you got to be smart situationally, maybe do it on a 2nd and 1. That way, if you get sacked, maybe you're facing a 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 10 or something like that. But I probably wouldn't run the bootleg on 1st down this time, but or maybe even a 3rd and 1 or something like that. But 1st and 5 if you get a penalty. But I think that'll be there. But I also think that it's not going to work every time. I think you're going to give up some sacks, but you have to be okay with that if you're Kansas City. Lastly, limit to the best of your ability the running attack between the 20s. I mentioned before, they do a pretty decent job, I think, in the red zone, the Kansas City Chiefs do, but San Francisco's running attack, particularly in the third quarter, is brutal. And I mentioned that in the first half, you want to try to limit their productivity in the run game. The reason I say in the first half is because, and I say this is kind of my philosophy on football. If your offensive line can lean on the defensive line throughout the entire first half, it takes a toll on the defensive line. It takes a toll when you're fighting against a 300-pound guy and being pushed backward. It takes a toll on you, a physical toll. And then once you get into the second half, in the third and fourth quarter, those 4-yard runs become increasingly 8, 10, 12, 20-yard runs. And Kansas City needs to try to force more punts. They need to sell out to kind of like what they did against Tennessee, although not in the same schematic way. They need to stop this run. The problem is Kyle Shanahan in the running game is going to have success. It's just, hey, maybe you can do a little bit of a better job than Green Bay did in the NFC Championship game. It's an easier said than done thing, but you have to preserve this defensive line. In my opinion, if they're getting push and they're getting success in the run game, I really, if I'm a defensive coordinator there, Spagnuolo, I think about even increasing the rotation there because you have to have fresh defensive linemen ready to go in the fourth quarter. So you got to do your best, if not so much even for the yards per play or if not so much for even the score of the game. You have to have the ability to get off the field in the fourth quarter because if Kansas City has a lead, they can give it up because San Francisco is good enough to get that back. I see this game as being a 7-10 kind of range, back and forth, 3-7, 10, 7, 10, 7, 3. It's just going to waver back and forth throughout the whole game. I do think that the team with the ball last is going to win this game in regulation. Brad on the Get Paid podcast thinks it's going to go to overtime. That would not shock me in the least. So let me say this then. I think the team with the ball last in regulation will score. So I think it's a close game. I think it's going to be a very incredible matchup. I'm more excited for this Super Bowl matchup than I've been in the last decade, and that's not hype either. I actually went back and looked at it. I'm pumped for this matchup. Mahomes versus Garoppolo. You get Kyle Shanahan versus Andy Reid. I think probably kind of my two favorite teams to watch throughout the year. The brand of football that San Francisco plays, a tough defensive line with the running ability and able to be efficient in the passing game with Garoppolo. And then Kansas City, just their ability to pass the ball and the track meet, the guys, the speed that they have on offense. Fantastic game. I cannot wait. Let's close this out with some daily fantasy projections. Just quickly, Jimmy Garoppolo at an 18.2, Mostert at a 16.4, Coleman, assuming he plays, at a 10.7. If not, I would give that same projection to Breida. I think they'll both have some success. Deebo Samuel at 10.1, Emmanuel Sanders at 8.9, Kendrick Bourne at 7.1, George Kittle at 13.4, and the San Francisco 49ers defense and special teams at 9. For the Kansas City Chiefs, meanwhile, I have Mahomes at an 18.4, so if you're keeping track, basically I have Garoppolo and Mahomes tied in terms of their output at the quarterback position. Damian Williams at 8.4, Darwin Thompson at 4.8, but Tyreek Hill at 21.5 is a huge one. Sammy Watkins 8.6, Demarcus Robinson 7.0. Travis Kelce 11.0, and defense and special teams for Kansas City is a 6. Now, as you know, or if people have watched these videos in this series throughout the regular season, know I will tell you if I disagree with any of these projections. Honestly, I don't disagree with a single one of these projections. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be razor thin. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, they have to show up. Kelce, in big moments, in big games, sometimes puts too much pressure on himself, which leads to mental errors, bad drops. If he starts the game, if they ease him in and he's catching these 5-yard outs, and that's what I would like to see from Kansas City the first 2 drives is Kelce looking good. If he's dropping passes, sometimes he gets down on himself. Sometimes he'll take a stupid penalty. You can win the mental game with Kelce. But I do think that he's going to have a nice game. I think he'll definitely find the end zone. And regardless, even if he starts slow, I think he'll finish fast, as we saw similarly with, I guess, the Houston Texans versus the Kansas City Chiefs. So there you go. That brings me through an entire episode of the game plan, the last one for the 2019 season. Please remember to like and subscribe to this channel. I'm going to be doing a lot more of these game plans as we get into the 2020 NFL season. I have a lot of fantasy football stuff coming down, a lot of NFL draft coming down. It's only going to get better from here. So please, once again, like and subscribe, and we will catch you soon. Thanks, everyone.